Hello, everyone.
Hey everyone.
And it's Chris and Frank back again on the AAS YouTube channel, where we're continuing the teaching online tools and tips. And in this module, which may be the last detailed content one, and then we're going to take a step back and try and do a synopsis. And we're going to cover scales, things that you can do and cannot do. If you have 10 people in your online course, 100, we'll stop at 1,000. And we'll talk about some of the things that you can do there. Chris, you want to start off?
Yeah, sure. I mean, at the modest scales, obviously you should be able to be just as interactive and engaged as in a face-to-face classroom. For instance, you can, with 10 or 15 or 20, you can use these video conferencing tools to see everyone in real time, and they can all see each other. So, it's synchronous engagement. I mean, and bearing in mind online, you want to find ways to engage both synchronously and asynchronously. But for the small group, obviously you can talk to everyone and you can know their names and you can see their names. And so, it's personalized at some level. And it's obvious to say, but it's the fundamental concern I think most faculty have over online teaching. They feel it's a disembodied experience. They feel like they're losing the body language, the eye contact, the direct physical engagement of the classroom. And there's of course some research that does show that doing Zoom or video conferencing is more distanced. It isn't quite as direct as visceral. So there's no arguing that. But I think with a small class or a small group, you're on name to name basis, and that's important too. And you can do a discussion. You can obviously do a real discussion. You have to be the moderator, which is fine, as you would be in the classroom, but you can, encourage everyone to come out of their shell and contribute.
Yeah, until Zoom gets to be holograms, and we're actually all there, and we can smell and touch, and all that coming up. Yeah, just to pick up a couple of the points that Chris mentioned there, because there are certainly some things that are scale independent. It doesn't matter if you have 10, 100, 1,000. And this is, as we hammered on in the first video in this series, is just engagement, right? Instructor engagement. And there will be differences between in-person and Zoom, but that doesn't take away from engaging in the best way that you can, that you know how. Other scale independent stuff is just having really explicit learning objectives. What are we going to get out of this course? What are some of my common standards of mastery? What I want my students to get out of this? And online, just have a very rich online palette. And we've talked about several ways that you can enrich that online palette through this series. And I also think it's really important to have at least in my experience, non-online activities. Go out and observe something. Go out and, make something and do an astronomical observation. Come back and use it and report it. So these are things that are scale independent. If people want a little bit more pragmatic stuff that is scale independent, one thing that I found, surprisingly enough, to me anyway, that students really enjoy in the report learning a lot on is good old flashcards. So whether those are physical flashcards, there's various digital varieties of those, right? Cerego has a whole science of learning behind flashcards, how often you do them, how frequently you repeat ones that you've already got. So, your institution may have Cerego. If not, check them out. If not, there are other free alternatives to flashcards, things like Spark, Brainscape, and I'll put links to those in the video description below. And these allow you to create flashcards on the go. And I'm somewhat surprised, I really am, that students really like when they're in their end of class evaluations. That was always one of the top things that I really got a lot out of the flashcard tool we were using. Wow, okay. So I'd encourage, using those as a scale independent, because that really does work at any scale. Yeah, so
If
scale a little bit on that one. We can go to sort of the typical, institutional 100-person of order, right? Could be 200, could be 300, but of order hundreds, scale classrooms. So it's as large by most institutionals definitions.
Yeah, so there the personal element is starting to break. It's unless I have a couple of colleagues they have a sort of preternatural ability to remember the names of questions.
Yeah, that's not me, unfortunately.
Not me either. I remember the best and the worst students, unfortunately. So the poor people in the middle, I don't remember all their names. Anyway, so at that point, it is hard to personalize it. And also, when you're in an online, like a Zoom dynamic, most people will just fade into the wallpaper in the background. So it's really hard to, it is really hard in video or an online situation to truly engage that many people. However, I mean, a few comments in that regard. The technology can handle it. I mean, zooming up to a few hundred definitely works. It can do it. And so Google's technology does too, and Skype, I think also. I've never been over 100 with Skype, but I think it works.
Okay.
Anyway, so the technology can usually handle it if your local bandwidth can, but managing the space becomes a little more difficult. However, what's useful to remember, and sometimes you need help with this, you may need a TA or a student alongside you helping. If you're managing a large set of people and you're doing some, a Q&A session or imagine they've watched your video lecture online, so you're actually trying to deal with issues that come up or misconceptions or things that, most people want to know the answer to, even if it wasn't their question. You sort of, it's hard when you're doing it yourself because you're paying attention to a lot of participants. And the chat window is often the most valuable place because the fraction of people who are willing to speak up with their little video, unmute themselves or, put themselves on video and talk is a fraction, but many more will be willing to say something in the chat window. So you sort of need to keep up with the chat pane. And then again, with 100 people, that could get very busy. And it starts to get hard to you're getting whiplash from moving between these. So you may need a helper in a live session to sort of read questions to you or point out important questions to. And that's a low footprint way for people online to engage just by typing it into chat. So that's a good thing. For instance, it wasn't a 4-credit class, but I was doing a live session for my MOOC 2 days ago, yesterday actually. We had 180 online, and that was a nice number. And the questions in the chat window and follow-up questions were just pouring in, and it was essentially impossible for me to keep up with it and still be on task answering the question that was right there in front of me. So you might need help at that level of scale.
Right, and usually on those systems, you can record the chat window, you can save the chat system, and so you can aggregate those questions and answer them, or find commonalities between those questions, then answer them in an asynchronous way, either through sound or through another video or on the discussion boards, whatever your modality might be. Generally do it in several modalities. So yeah, it can be challenging to keep up with, questions coming in every couple hundred. But a take on that, and one I've run in the past in both synchronous and asynchronous, is at the end of the material to do either one of two things. Have them submit something that is the one muddiest point in the whole thing. Tell them where you maybe didn't communicate as well as you thought you did. And they'll be happy to tell you where you muddled up. And so if they're, so one-offs, okay. But, if 15, 20 people are all saying, boy, that, black body thermal radiator thing, that really didn't work very well for me. Okay, then that's a key off that, okay, I need to recover that material. The other one that works well is to have them do, and so I would call those the one muddiest. The other one to do is the 1-minute summary. Tell me in one paragraph what this material was about in your own words. That works well because then you can also see if you sample those, what's getting across or what they're really liking. and what they're not liking. And these work well at the 100, 200, 300 scale. And of course, the real goal of all this is for you, the instructor, to discover what your students are learning or not learning, as the case may be. So it's as informative to you and to your advantage to do it, to help engage your course, than it is for the students to be able to say what it is they're learning or not learning.
Right. Another method that you can do either the high-tech built into the software way or a low-tech way, so I'll give you the two choices, is polling. So most of all the video conferencing software has polling options, and there can be a learning curve on that. We use clickers in the classroom and so on, so it's a version of doing that online. If the if your system doesn't do that, or the learning curve is just something you don't want to face, I'll remind you there's a low-tech way of doing it, just as there is a low-tech way of doing it as opposed to clickers, which is the ABCD cards. I'm sure you've seen that. You take a sheet of paper and it's got quadrants A, B, C, D, and there's a classic color coding of it, and you can download versions of this, of course. So basically, you get all your kids in your class to have that in front of them. They've already folded it into 4, and you can ask them in real time, and they just hold it up, and then you see it. If you minimize the little screens to thumbnails, you get this perfect visual map, and it's color coded if you have color.
So it'll process it pretty quickly.
So you can process it, and everyone gets to see the answer. So that's wonderful for just misconception testing or on the fly, or just polling about something that's in the news, or what they think about some societal issue, or some something where there's not necessarily a right answer. Of course, sometimes you're just looking at opinions rather than just testing people.
Are we alone?
Yeah. So I would say whether it's that low tech way or the built-in or higher tech way, you should look at polling, because that definitely scales. You can do that up to hundreds with no trouble.
The other thing I'd encourage is mixing it up. Whether you're doing synchronous or asynchronous, you don't have to do the exact same thing every time. Do from I = N to 40 throughout the course. Mix it up. So do some things someday, do other things another way, but spice it up a little bit by mixing up the different ways that you engage instead of always being the same one. Even though it may be one great technology, right? Flashcards, but by the time you get to the 35th flashcard, okay, we know it's coming. So mix it up. Keep it dynamic. Keep them guessing on how you're going to engage them next time, and they'll be more lively and more engaged.
Another option, and I have to put an asterisk on this because I've not done this for more than about, I think, 35. I haven't done it for the hundreds, although I know in principle you can. Zoom and the other softwares have the ability to do meeting rooms, or what we might call breakouts. And so that's a way of taking, a fairly big class and assigning it. You have to do some legwork ahead of time to sort of pre-assign the groups. Otherwise, there's a little overhead in the session itself. And you could do it randomly, of course, just from your class list. You don't have to think about it in too much detail. And so basically, the tool, the Zoom or other software like that, will have the ability to create, private limited spaces for smaller numbers of people. You have to designate a lead, obviously someone to report out from that group that you've assigned to think about something. And I think Zoom goes up to 50 different meeting spaces in parallel. So you could subdivide a class of 200 into groups of 4, for example, and smaller than that, it's probably a little easier to manage. It probably requires a dry run. I wouldn't do that cold on something really important, on the fly. I would test it out at smaller scale, just so you know how all the tools work. But it definitely, I've heard from colleagues who have done it for bigger numbers than I have, that it does work up to the few hundreds. And so that's a way of doing what we would call breakout sessions in a physical classroom.
Right, as though you were having lab sections or something along those lines. And then, it is, I will say, on those breakout rooms, it's a bit of management to do. So again, it's not something you necessarily want to do every time you have a synchronous or asynchronous event, but it can be part of the mixture to put it in.
And remember, we all are quite aware that we're quite likely to be coming back online in the fall. So although everyone's scrambling to get through the spring, you have all summer to learn about this stuff. And just come back gangbusters in the fall.
Yeah, you'll be doing these videos.
Exactly.
Videos. And so I think we'll just polish off. So this is just going to apply to a very few, but it's worthwhile bringing up. And this is class sizes in the thousands. So these are going to be large scale MOOCs in other venues where you can have 1,200. You may even just have a popular course on campus that draws 1,200, 1,500. And of course, there's a lot of really low quality ways to teach at this scale of 1,000. Some of those are going to be, purely canned standardized courses that are managed, so to speak, by grads and postdocs. So you're not really engaged. It's sort of this canned class you go through. And you can substitute software and course mentors for engaged instructors, which is not you. I think there is a place for self-paced, self-directed models. I do think those have some value, but on the other hand, if you just blindly embrace them and sort of, blindly embrace that 21st century version of a correspondence course, that doesn't work so well either. Don't have any outdoor activities at all, right? Just purely digital online. So these are all bad ways to teach at 1,000. So some of the lessons that you can do at 100, you can do at 1,000. There are some challenges at doing it at that scale. Some things are going to go. One thing that works really well at that scale initially, in order to get engagement, is tell students to say hello, say something about themselves, say why they're in this course, what do they hope to get out of this course, and then you engage. You don't, at 1,000, it's a bit much to say hello to everybody, but you can engage a couple of the more interesting ones that you might feel you want to do. So try and get that active presence from day one in the course, so that you don't give the impression that you're just some canned automated.
Right. And as a practical matter, when you're dealing with those very large numbers of more than a few hundred, if you're fielding you're not navigating, postage stamp little video screens, that's not going to work. But if it's in the chat window, and again, you probably need someone to help you, and you just ask them all, what's one thing you want to learn in this course or whatever, just ask them a very simple, direct question, which would have a short answer. You can just scan the chat pane and just cherry pick. You don't have to be complete or thorough. You can just cherry pick the ones you like, the ones that are informative, or the ones that you see quite a lot of. And that's just that sampling approach, even if it's a huge class, is just going to work fine.
And I would say at 1,000, one of the instructor qualities that really becomes to be a premium is to be patient, to be affirmative. I mean, in general, it happens at all of them, but at 1,000, it really becomes a premium that you are seen and perceived as a patient and affirmative instructor. Definitely more weight appears at that scale on that. So yeah, so probably this applies, 1,000 is a small number of people. They've probably already done 10 and 100, sizes. You don't just go from 0 to 1,000 usually. Usually it's a growth process. So.
But I think the take home from what we've said so far is that for those of you who are maybe not as familiar, who may be familiar with teaching a few hundred, but never online, you shouldn't be scared of that. I mean, the model doesn't break to do. You can still be engaged. You can still do a lot of the things you normally do, or variations thereon at that number.
And you won't have a bunch of students looking at their phones or tablets while you're doing something up there. So there are advantages. All right. I think that's what I had to say on scales.
Yeah.
So thank you, everyone, for listening in. Thanks, Chris. Thanks.
Yes.
And we'll see you on the next one for sort of a synopsis of what we've done over the last, this will be video number 11. So we'll sum up. All right. See ya.
Bye.
Oops, not that one.